Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of the Paleoconnection. Today we're actually going to do something a little bit different. We are going to cover a series of articles relevant in the news this week, or also just relevant in a philosophical sense. And having said that, let's get right into it with the big news of the day. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died today at age 87, which, of course, she was quite famous for being the second woman appointed to the Supreme Court, as well as the first Jewish woman on the Supreme Court, and was also long hated by conservatives for being a rather outspoken liberal in all of her decisions. This has really been the big fear of the left ever since Justice Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. Everyone was speculating that if she could just hold on to the election, they would elect a Democrat and then she would safely be replaced by a Democrat. Maybe that will even be the case, because it seems quite doubtful that there will be any attempt to smash through a nomination so close to the election. So, hey, in some sense, you got to say really good job to Justice Ginsburg on sticking in there such a long time. Eh, Brandon?
Yeah, she was really hanging on there for quite some time, and I thought that she was going to make it until after the election. We actually haven't, well, at least I haven't heard much about her health recently. It was, let's say, about a year ago where I think the news about her health was common to see, in CNN or other news sources. And then I think I guess ever since COVID hit, maybe since like February, I'd say, I haven't really heard much about her. And then suddenly you hear the news that she has passed. And it's a very interesting time, because it actually brings us to a very similar situation that Obama had, where he was nominating, was it Neil Gorsuch? And there was an election looming. Now, of course, Obama already had served his 8 years, so he wasn't going to be reelected. But Republicans were saying that we should wait until after the election, obviously hoping that a Republican would be nominated president, and then Republicans would get to make the nomination. So Republicans blocked Neil Gorsuch, and we kind of have this similar situation, although Trump is, of course, fighting for a re-election. Democrats are now hoping that Biden wins the election, and then if they can delay the election of a nomination of a new Supreme Court justice, then they can get their guy in. So we kind of have a similar situation in a way, and I was wondering what you think about it. Would the Republicans be hypocrites if they did not kind of follow the same line as they did with Gorsuch and Obama? Or do you think that this situation is just entirely different this time?
I think you could make the argument that after what we've seen with the way President Trump was treated, where you basically have what you could consider kind of a soft coup happening with all of the Russia collusion allegations, and then Ukraine Gate, and just a never-ending amount of attempts to impeach or hinder the presidency, you could really argue that a lot of these fair play rules that once existed are completely off the table. At least that's what I would think. When you're at this point in politically with where we are in the U.S., it kind of just, you only succeed in making yourself look like a jerk and a naive imbecile if you continue playing by the rules when your opponent really doesn't want to. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn because, of course, I would say that the way things are now and sort of win at all costs, that's not a type of system that I would like for the country. But the fact of the matter is that it has come to that. And yeah, I'm just torn. I do think that it would make Republicans look like hypocrites. But in this day and age, that doesn't seem to matter. I am pretty confident that Trump is going to actually win re-election. So I don't really think it's that big of a deal if the nomination was made after the election anyways. So yeah, I'm really torn, and I really don't want to say, right now what I would prefer to happen, because I think positives for both things. I think if for whatever reason Trump said, okay, yeah, we will wait till after the re-election, it would be, very honorable of him to do that. But at the same time, if he said, well, no, it's my right to do it, Democrats can try to block it with, votes and going through the process in the legislative branch, and if they can accomplish that, then they can do it. So I'm kind of fine with both things happening, really, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I honestly think it is so close to the election that it would be really unpopular, and yeah, let's not do it. I mean, but if it was 2 months, 3 months earlier, then I think we'd have a real debate on our hands. Well, interestingly enough, just recently, on September 17th, they published an article actually dealing with speculations about who the next Supreme Court justice nomination would be. It came from Revolver News, and it involves some inside sources within the White House counsel's office. The article reads, one source close to the counsel's office has told Revolver that various open borders agents have been promoting federal Judge James C. Ho for the Supreme Court shortlist. What is disturbing about this development is that Judge Ho has an extensive public record as an activist on behalf of birthright citizenship, the current practice whereby any child born on American soil is automatically considered a U.S. citizen, even if both parents are here illegally. The article continues. Here is a representative passage from Judge Ho's defense of birthright citizenship in Anchor Baby Policy titled Defining America. These proposals raise serious constitutional questions, however. Birthright citizenship is guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. That birthright is protected no less for children of undocumented persons than for descendants of Mayflower passengers. That is, in my opinion, an extremely controversial position. And the article does go on to say that, of course, the interpretation of the Constitution proposed by Judge Ho is by no means a consensus position. Common sense might even cause us to doubt that the framers of the 14th Amendment had in mind a principle that could be used to justify the outrageous abuse of American sovereignty that is our present birthright citizenship policy. A scholar from the Claremont Institute by the name of John Eastman said the following on the topic. In a nation such as the United States, which is rooted in the idea that governments are formed based on the consent of the governed, the notion that foreign nationals can unilaterally confer citizenship on their children as a result of a legal entry to the United States and therefore entirely without our consent is a bit bizarre. It rewards lawlessness, undermining the rule of law. It deprives Congress of its constitutional authority to determine naturalization power. The actual language of the 14th Amendment actually contains two requirements for automatic citizenship, not just one. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, that's the birth on the U.S. soil part, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States of the state wherein they reside. That's the second requirement, subject to the jurisdiction. That is the source of much confusion today, because to our modern ear, that just means subject to our laws. That is one meaning, of course, but not the only one, and not the one that the drafters of the 14th Amendment had in mind. For them, being merely subject to our laws meant that one was subject to our partial or territorial jurisdiction. It was a jurisdiction applicable to temporary sojourners, what we today call temporary visitors. It was not the kind of jurisdiction that was codified into the 14th Amendment. For that, a more complete allegiance-owing jurisdiction was required. Unquote. Back to the article itself, Revolver's source at the White House counsel's office further revealed that while the White House counsel Cipollone, this is a person's name, was originally committed to carrying out President Trump's intentions to repeal birthright citizenship, he now thinks that such a move would be too risky, and that even Attorney General Barr, who's generally quite good on many things, has expressed squeamishness regarding following through on the president's birthright citizenship policy. Finally, our sources have revealed that Judge Ho, together with outside operatives from the neoconservative quote-unquote think tank First Liberty, have been aggressively promoting opposition research on rival Supreme Court contenders. Their efforts have resulted in keeping alternatives such as Judge Andy Oldham, whose views align more closely with the president on birthright citizenship, off of the Supreme Court shortlist. Their reasoning was that Andy Oldham was somehow a closeted racist, unquote. So now, going back away from the article, I just have to say that I thought what could have been truly the most revolutionary aspect of President Trump's presidency could have actually been overturning this automatic birthright citizenship to illegals. When he announced this, it was kind of like many people on the not mainstream but the dissident right were all very excited that maybe this was a sign that President Trump really is our guy, willing to stand up for us. But in reality, that all got slowed down, and now we see that there's still people in the White House kind of gunning to try to make this a reality, and that they may be wanting to do it through the Supreme Court. And in anticipation of this, you have neoconservatives who are pro-birthright citizenship, like Judge Ho, planning in advance to smack this down. So what do you make of all of this, Brandon?
Well, at first I was a bit confused because it says here that it said one source close to the counsel's office have told Revolver that various open border agents have been promoting federal Judge James C. Ho for Supreme Court shortlist. These are people in the White House counsel's office. So I was a bit confused at what that exactly means. There's open border. There's people in the White House counsel office who support open borders. That was confusing to me. Why would those people be counseling the president?
Right.
Do you have any idea?
What I think it is that you have kind of the fiscal super conservatives who tend to be much more in line with libertarian sort of thought. And they have these really super romantic ideas about how liberty can work absolutely everywhere. And it's sort of this fringe position you do get among libertarians that open borders is basically justifiable. Now, I'm sure these guys wouldn't go so far as to say that there should be no measures whatsoever trying to prevent illegal aliens from getting here. But I think they are interested in honoring these really radical pure constitutionalist principles, where they think it's the pure constitutionalist position to have this rote birthright citizenship. And I also think that there are some somewhat nefarious agents at play who know that they would lose millions of dollars if they crack down on illegal immigration, because their companies depend so much on these basically illegal dealings with illegal immigrants. And they are interested in having as cheap labor as possible in the U.S. So they will spend, millions and millions of dollars themselves financing politicians and judges and think tanks to undermine immigration reform. At least that's, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're probably referring to maybe like I think the Koch brothers were famously pro-open border. The big conservative donors.
Exactly.
One of them died recently. But yeah, they took kind of a libertarian stance on borders, and they thought that open borders were good for business. Businesses could utilize the cheap labor. And I guess you're right that there probably would be a lot of corporations that have deep interests and are trying to manipulate or change opinion in the White House to support or to keep the birthright citizenship clause. But another thing I had a question about with this article was that we don't know anything else, at least from this article, about this federal judge, James C. Ho. I'm not ready to write the guy off just for this one stance, right? Like, obviously, he's a judge that has various opinions on a whole range of different issues, and I would like to know what those were as well. Maybe issues on abortion. Maybe there'd be issues on abortion that I would like. Maybe there'd be other issues. I tend to like someone who is a strict constitutionalist. But so maybe if I saw some of his other opinions, I could put this behind me and hold my nose and approve his nomination. I mean, what do you think? This obviously isn't just the only issue that we have to think about when we're going to nominate a Supreme Court justice.
I hate to be kind of a one-issue guy when it comes to the Supreme Court. I really am not, but this to me is such a pivotal issue because I believe that the U.S. is experiencing really rapid demographic change, which is disenfranchising literally through the way, because of the way the Electoral College works, it's really going to be disenfranchising tens of millions of people, if not hundreds of millions of people, because we're talking about potentially a major Republican stronghold like Texas going blue before 2030 or something due to the amounts of illegal immigration coming in. We've already seen Virginia basically go fully blue. And we're also looking, some of the other states that are shifting that we may never get back would also be Florida, and I've also heard Ohio, because of not just legal immigration, but illegal immigration and their children. So I think it's one of those situations for me that if we don't act within the next few years, we're just never going to act and never really. We're just going to see the Republican Party become the Democrats' light. It'll just be the Democrats 10 years ago party. You're already seeing that a little bit. So in my opinion, it would kind of sink everything, even if he was pro-life and supported a lot of the other things, I think, because ultimately, if demographic shift continues and the Republican Party continues to become much more liberal and just trying to court the Black and Hispanic vote, which we've seen President Trump do a lot of, eventually that will be all that the Republicans are, and what will be the point for voting if you really are a classic American conservative. At least that's what I think about it.
So you see it as kind of a linchpin issue that, if this domino falls, then it's sort of just over for traditional conservatives. But yeah, my next question, I guess you kind of answered. So even if he was, for the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you would still, say that no, we can't have somebody who is a birthright citizen activist on the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Okay.
And I got to say, the only way it could ever really work out is if somehow the Hispanic vote in second generation Hispanic Americans were, instead of being just 35% Republican, I mean, what if they were more like 40% to Republican, and maybe this wild group of 10 to 15% Libertarian or something? I mean, that would be certainly a really interesting direction for America. But that's not how it's going to be. So this really is a linchpin issue. You said it best. So how about we transition to the next article, which you prepared?
Yeah, sure thing. So the next article is an article from Breitbart. It's titled "Soros-Backed Coalition Preparing for Post-Election Day Chaos. We're Going to Fight Like Hell." So this article is all about the left-wing activist groups that are being funded by George Soros to try to organize a sort of election day chaos or post-election chaos around the country. And if you read the article, they're basically setting up the situation where if Trump wins, then they're going to see it as Trump cheated somehow. So reading a bit from the article says, quote, "Under the guise of seeking to prevent a constitutional crisis, a massive network of well-funded left-wing activists and progressive groups are training, organizing, and planning to mobilize millions of Americans should President Trump contest the election results, refuse to concede, or claim an early victory." Now, what I thought was interesting about this was some of these things are not as serious as others. So, for example, refusing to concede, I do see as a possible problem if the results did show that Trump lost by a landslide or whatnot. I would have some doubts about that. But I see Trump refusing to concede as worse than, for example, claiming an early victory. Not all of these things can be seen as bad as the others. And they seem to be setting the stage for any type of Trump victory or Trump declaration of a victory or refusing to concede. Anything will prompt these protests. The article goes on to further say that coalition group heads have described the battle against Trump's re-election as predicated on the unfounded notion that the president has been tirelessly working to undermine the upcoming elections. "He's laying the groundwork now to steal the election. We need to lay the groundwork now to fight back," said Sarah Dull, co-founder and chief communications officer at Indivisible, which is one of the groups funded by Soros. The article goes on to say, "Trump is already laying the groundwork by declaring the result rigged. So we are sounding the alarm now," said Sean Eldridge, president of Stand Up America, which is another Soros-funded interest group. And furthermore, the article states, "With a Trump must go no matter what attitude, the idea of a legitimate Trump win is all but impossible. When we win in November," says Indivisible's, i.e. political director Lucy Solomon, in a video describing the group's preparations, "they intend to ensure that Trump isn't able to steal the election in the days afterwards." So moving away from the article now, basically what we're seeing here is an attempt to delegitimize a real Trump victory, an honest Trump victory. And I've kind of been saying this for a long time. I'm very worried about these elections, and no matter which side wins, there's going to be protests and chaos and I think rioting and protesting. And especially if Trump wins, we have all of these groups. It's sort of a meme these days and a conspiracy theory that George Soros is, paying people via, Craigslist to go out and, protest. But it's, this isn't quite to that level, but yeah, he's funding all of these liberal groups. And basically these groups are training people to go out on election night or after election night to, say that the Trump victory, if it happens, is not legitimate. And this is a huge problem. And yeah, I think violence is going to happen, and would not be surprised if, hundreds or even thousands of people die. What do you think, Verv?
Yeah, and I'd like to even point out that there's been some interesting tweets on this topic where people have been revealing that for a long time George Soros has been giving millions of dollars in these little-known district attorney races in places like Baltimore, San Francisco, the Florida Central Courts, which deals with like Tampa, some parts of Tampa. And the goal, some people are speculating, is that the more that they can gain control of local district attorneys, the more that they're going to be able to enable a sort of color revolution of their own. Because when they have people doing things like what the Portland mayor and Portland DA do, where when Antifa goes out and causes violence, oh, it's okay, no charges. We're letting you out the same day, no bail. When they can do that kind of thing, they could basically allow for mass chaos after the election. And, exactly as you said, there really could be lots of instances of violence where we're just never going to see justice because of all of these major cities and important areas having in far left judges present.
Yeah, you're right about the funding of the district attorneys. In Chicago, Kim Foxx, who became quite popular with the Jussie Smollett incident, and the whole brouhaha around him not being charged properly. She's an African American. She also was funded by, I believe, $2 million from a George Soros PAC, backed Kim Foxx for her reelection. So yeah, it is very true that his money has been, going to all sorts of different groups around America to further promote this liberal agenda. And like I said before, this, people have been saying this for many years, but when you bring this kind of thing up in, an internet conversation, people, roll their eyes and say, oh, George Soros, he's sort of the boogeyman of the right. But, there's a lot of truth to this stuff once you start digging through it. And I just wanted to read one more quote from this article just to kind of drill home the point we're trying to make here. The article goes on further to say that amplifying the groundless notion even further, an article by The Nation last week titled, "Is Trump Planning a Coup d'etat?" was widely circulated among leaders of groups from the Protect the Results in order to encourage individuals to join their effort. So there's articles that are being written that are sort of insinuating that Trump is going to try to steal the election. He's going to try to cheat. He's going to launch a coup d'etat if he doesn't win. And this is the kind of stuff that, it's like throwing meat to the lions. They're eating it up. These leftist groups are eating it up and saying, we're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for freedom. When in reality, it seems like it might be the other way around. They're actually right. They're the fascists themselves.
Right. This is all speculation, what they're doing. They're coming up with all of these spurious reasons to claim that he's trying to steal the election, but they really don't bring any evidence whatsoever. And, it's one of these things when you're trying to see who's actually trying to steal the election. You can go back to the old elementary school principle, he who smelt it dealt it, right? So, in my opinion, it's definitely the left that, not all the left, obviously, your Democrat aunt isn't trying to steal the election. But I think that there are radical far left activist types that are on the receiving end of Soros money, and they are planting these seeds of doubt and trying to rally people, just as the article said, to bring about chaos and to basically steal the election themselves.
Okay, great points there. Whoever smelt it, dealt it. That is true. Let's move on to the next article. Which one do you have for us now, Verv?
We will now be talking about plastics, which is always a very exciting thing. Basically, I came across an article from NPR, which talks about kind of the history of plastic recycling, which really ended up turning out to be a big lie. One of the interesting things that they talked about was that there's a woman in Oregon. It opens up with a woman in Oregon talking about how she struggles to manage her recycling center. And she goes and tells the city council that it's costing more money to recycle because what you're really just doing is disposing of these plastics as garbage. And she said they reacted like it was heresy. One of they all had these expressions on their face like, you're lying. Plastic is gold. We take time to clean it. We take the labels off it. We separate it, and it all gets recycled. But in reality, the bulk of the plastic that you believe is being recycled isn't being recycled at all. And the industry has been aware of the fact that recycling is not keeping plastic out of landfills. To quote one of the earliest programs on recycling, there is serious doubt that recycling plastic can ever be made viable on an economic basis. This is a quotation from 1974. One of the insiders, a man named Larry Thomas, who was the former president of the Society of the Plastics Industry, which is now known as the Plastics Industry Association, said that if the public thinks that recycling is working, then they are not going to be as concerned about the environment. As a result of this, over the years, there were many advertising campaigns done from all of these companies like Exxon, Chevron, Dow, DuPont, who were lobbying organizations and promoting to the public the concept that we can recycle plastic and plastic is not such an environmental catastrophe. Originally, they were spending tens of millions, but eventually the total number that they were spending on these advertisements would go up to $50 million. And if you're like me, you probably believe that all the plastic that you try to recycle is honestly recycled. But the real problem is that the cost of separating plastic is way too high and that plastic degrades very quickly. A lot of the recycled plastic becomes very low grade and can only really be used once after it's been recycled. There's not this continuum of plastic recycling that we all tend to envision. Another interesting part from this article was how in 1989, all of these plastics executives began quietly campaigning and lobbying around 40 states to mandate that the recycle symbol appear on all plastics, even if there was no way to economically recycle these plastics. Originally, this symbol was only appearing on things like big plastic jugs of milk and things that were recyclable. But then suddenly they passed it so all of these products that were made of plastic that weren't recyclable were now being thought widely recyclable, shifting the public image of plastic in general. This was all done by the oil industry, right? That makes more than $400 billion a year making plastic. So spending $10 or $50 million on these PR campaigns to convince everyone that recycling isn't an economic catastrophe basically was to their advantage. So at the end of the day, what we're really looking at is all of these environmentalist symbols, these green campaigns, were actually tools to trick consumers into consuming plastic without having any guilty conscience whatsoever. They failed to do what they tried to do. Now, what do you think of that, Brandon?
Well, I must say that there's very few things I read nowadays that completely surprise me, and this article did that. I guess I was just completely naive about plastic recycling. I mean, obviously, how often do you read about it, right? But just like most people, I just assumed that, yeah, we recycle all the plastic that we use, right? We finish with the product, and then we throw the plastic bottle in the recycling bin, and then it gets taken to the recycling center, and well, it gets made into plastic again, right? And it's reused because, well, it must save money, right? Because we're reusing something, right? This is what I thought, and as the article says, this is what everybody believes, because this is what we're taught, right? I mean, all throughout school, we're taught we need to recycle, and we're taught like how the process works, and there's documentaries made about it. And, there's these recycling plants all over the place, right? And well, what are they doing if they're not recycling plastic? So, I was really confused, but as I read the article, it all started to kind of make sense, because, you have all these different kinds of plastic, and you're throwing them all in one bin together. And as the article states, these different types of plastic, have to be sorted. That sorting is a very time-consuming and costly process that involves not only sorting, but the transportation of the materials from place to place. And you have to hold the materials in one place for a long period of time, and then bring them to another place. So all this, right, takes time, money, effort. When an oil company or the companies that produce plastic, they already have all of the equipment in place to produce another bottle from the raw materials. So, well, hey, why not just make the new bottle, rather than wait for this long, laborious, and costly process to take effect? So after reading the whole article, it makes perfect sense. However, I still have quite a few questions about it, and one of those questions is this a problem unique to the United States, or is this something that is happening around the world? As our listeners might know, me and Verv both live in Korea, and as you may not know, Korea is quite strict with its recycling. I guess it kind of makes sense because it's such a small country. There's limited space, so they can't have huge garbage dumps all over the place. Nobody wants to live near them. So they decided to become strict on recycling, and there's very large penalties if you are caught not recycling. I think they can be upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 fines. So I was kind of wondering, is this the case in Korea too? When I, go through the process of separating my plastic, every week, and I take it to the recycling bins, is this all getting sent to China to be buried underground, or are other countries like Korea actually reusing this plastic? What do you think about that, Verv?
Well, I know that there was a recent scandal, and I think it was 2019 or 18, where they had discovered how a lot of the waste that we sent to the Philippines from Korea was disposed in the most ridiculous and terrible ways. And President Moon really took a stance, and he rallied politicians to make it illegal to export garbage in this way for the benefit of countries like the Philippines, and also because China was just no longer accepting all of the paper and plastic exports we were doing to them. And there was this new rule developed that each municipality or each province would be responsible for disposing of its own waste in a responsible way. So I wouldn't be surprised if it actually is the case that we do recycle plastic better than other places. This might not be that interesting to people who aren't here, but if you actually get a cheap local soda like Mirinda or some of these other kind of off brands that you only really get in Korea, not Chilsung Cider, they tend to have the higher quality bottles, but like if you get Mirinda, for instance, the 2-liter plastic bottle you have is actually downright floppy. Once you empty it of most of its contents and you lift it up to pour it again, you start, the plastic just kind of immediately bends in your hand. And I'm convinced that it's made of very low-grade recycled plastic. So that's something I've never experienced in the United States. I'm kind of thinking that Korea really is making an effort to meaningfully use plastic locally. So, at least there's that. But, we're also a country that doesn't have as great of an oil supply as the U.S. I mean, everything has to be shipped through the Malacca Straits practically. So, I'm not entirely positive, but that's a very good question.
Yeah, but yeah, this is a very interesting article. It's a very long article. I encourage our listeners to read the article for themselves. The link will be posted in the video. Shifting gears now to our last news story. This is one that is from earlier this month, and it is from the website Quillette, which has become quite popular in recent years. The title is The Myth of the Harmonious Indigenous Conservationism. And this article has a lot to do with what's been happening in Canada recently with an oil pipeline that has been trying to be built in British Columbia. But it also, goes deeper and further into this common belief that, the noble savage, or that Native Americans or indigenous peoples around the world somehow have this special quality to them, and that they once lived in a harmonious way with nature, and these European white capitalist greedy pigs have sort of ruined this world that the natives once inhabited. So to get into the article, it says, quote, "It seems like a long time ago, but only 6 months ago, pundits had convinced themselves that the great morality tale of our time was playing out in an obscure part of British Columbia. Following an internal political fight within the, and I might mispronounce this, Wet'suwet'en First Nation over a local pipeline project, one columnist wrote that the indigenous people of Earth have become the conscience of humanity. In this dire season, it is time to listen to them." In this quotation, you can really see the mindset of many progressives, I would say, these days, in that we need to it's kind of weird because they view these First Nations or indigenous peoples as, in a way, being superior, and the lifestyle that they live is superior. But the funny thing is that these indigenous people tend to live a very conservative lifestyle, one that is definitely it hasn't changed much over thousands of years, one that definitely does not buy into the progressive notions like, there's 300 genders and that sort of thing. So it is very weird that progressives hold these indigenous peoples up as the highest standard to look up to, even though they tend to be deeply conservative. To go on further in the article, it says, "In fact, the elected leadership of the Wet'suwet'en had chosen to participate in the controverted pipeline project. The nationwide protests against the pipeline that followed were in fact sparked by unelected hereditary chiefs who long have received government signing bonuses. It's unclear how this qualifies them for the exalted status of humanity's conscience." So here what we have again is we have what seems to be these white liberals who have co-opted the message and are, agreeing with a certain part of this tribe who is the unelected hereditary chief part of the tribe, and the actual people who have been elected by the people who live in the tribe, they approve of the project. But nobody is listening to them because that doesn't go along with, the environmentalists and the progressive mindset, which would be to, say no to this pipeline. So it tends to not even matter sometimes what the natives say. Kind of going along with this is, what recently happened with the quote unquote Washington football team these days. Their nickname, the Redskins, which has been around for decades, was recently changed. this all was sort of a result of, the George Floyd protests and the subsequent protests, I think, in Portland. All of this sort of came together in a perfect storm that somehow resulted in the Redskins losing their name. But, there's been many polls in the past where Native Americans have just flat out said, we don't care about this name. It does not necessarily offend us. Now, of course, some Native Americans it does, but there's been polls that say the overwhelming majority are not offended by it, but it doesn't really matter what the actual facts or statistics say. It's what the agenda is of the progressives that tends to get all of the noise and the play on TV and radio stations and so on and so forth. So thoughts on this, Verv?
I think it's quite interesting that we're talking about hereditary leaders here. This is about the least progressive thing imaginable, especially when they wield actual power to sign on with the government and collect these bonuses. They're basically living in, a primitive monarchy, for, lack of a better word, a primitive chiefdom, literally. And yet they invoke this sort of noble savage concept. And it kind of reminds me of how, when they talk about how you got to listen to black and brown voices, this voices of the oppressed type thing, where when you look, you see that the indigenous populations basically have been holocausted, right? They've suffered more than anybody, and they have more rights than all of us because they've been in the Americas since long before we ever were. But it ends up transforming itself into this really impotent view of the natives as these supreme vanguard of the revolution. But at the end of the day, they are, getting signing bonuses and operating in a chiefdom, a far cry from some primitive communist paradise that the far left would actually like them to be living up to. Moreover, a lot of these communities, of course, are also very impoverished. They tend to have high rates of criminality, high rates of substance abuse. And this isn't just true for the United States, it's also true for Canada. And this is not something I'm making light of by any means whatsoever. It's a real tragedy that has to be addressed. But the idea of the noble savages, I think kind of the joke is right there in the name itself, right? Because savage itself has such a severe and brutish connotation that is the opposite of nobility. And at the end of the day, it doesn't apply whatsoever.
Yeah, this is all kind of tied in with the current, the culture war and, the current belief of white fragility and, the trend of white guilt going around. And, there's this belief that white people and Europeans and Americans are uniquely evil in some way. What's that book that just came out? What is his name? Kindy. What's the name of that book about? Is it called White Fragility?
Yeah, I believe that's the actual title.
Yeah, I think the title is White Fragility, and the author, his last name is Kindy, I think. If I'm wrong, sorry about that. But the guy who wrote White Fragility, I remember reading an article where, and I think actually in the book, I didn't read the book, of course.
To butt in for a second,
Yeah.
White Fragility is actually the book by Robin DiAngelo.
Okay.
I am not sure. I've heard the name that the Kindy name, but that is a different book, sadly.
Okay. Well, we'll get that name for you in a bit. But in this book, the author, it's the New York Times bestseller. He actually in the book states that when he was in college, he told his professor that white people were in fact aliens that came from another planet because they are so uniquely barbaric or evil. And the book goes on to say that the professor, corrected him in his thought. However, he went on to write this book that I'm talking about that goes on to, it's basically a racist book against white people. But my point here is that all of these things are kind of tied in together, in that, the West, white people, capitalism, they're all uniquely evil, and we have to listen to the oppressed people. And in the oppression Olympics, in this oppression hierarchy, at the very top, we have black people, and it seems like they have decided to share the top of this hierarchy with the native population. I remember seeing a picture of the Chaz experiment that happened in Seattle, and I think we all saw those gardens that they had planted that were hilariously terrible. But there were signs in front of some of these gardens, and some of the signs said things like, the food from this garden is only for our African American or Native American brothers. So they seem to try to form this alliance with natives and sort of, forge this belief in, because we all know that Europeans and white people mistreated natives in the past, and we all know that we have also mistreated black people in the past through slavery. So they've kind of forged this unholy alliance that it's hard to argue against, right? Because how do you argue against the top of the hierarchy that has Native Americans and African Americans at the top, right? So I see all of this tied in together. And the article, if you'd like to read the rest of it on your own, goes on to say that, it is a myth that the indigenous people around the world were, conservationists that lived in harmony with nature. It gives many examples of animals that went extinct through hunting. Most of the megafauna that lived tens of thousands of years ago throughout the Americas and in places like Australia were killed by Australian Aboriginals, and the Native Americans that supposedly came over via a land bridge from Asia, they also killed those megafauna like woolly mammoths, for example. And that sort of thing we don't learn about that in history books. We don't learn that the first Native Americans came down from the Bering Strait and killed all of the large animals. What we learn is that, they lived in harmony with them in nature and only took, what they needed. They used every part of the bison because, they respected nature. Like, that's the kind of thing we learn. But I think this article gives us a different view and shows that, no, in fact, there was a lot of mistreatment of animals and of nature by these indigenous people. And I also remember reading an article years ago about how Native Americans used burning techniques to get rid of large swaths of forest. I remember hearing that much of the what we consider as natural plains in the Midwestern states, they're not natural at all. They were the cause of vast Native American burnings over tens of thousands of years to provide, to either get the animals out to try to hunt them, or to try to burn the animals in kind of like push them into a certain direction so they were able to hunt them more easily, or to burn to use the land for agriculture. So yeah, it's definitely a myth, and reading this article was very interesting and sort of confirmed many of the beliefs that I kind of already had. Any final thoughts, Verv, before we...
Yes, I did look up. The name of the book is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Yes, and with that, I would say that it kind of reminds me of a sort of this hierarchy reminds me almost of a sort of shamanism when you think about it, because you've got so many people on the woke left saying, okay, my role as a white person is to just sit and listen, to just shut up and seed the ground to someone who is not white, specifically someone who's from a more intersectional background, like the ideal being a combination of oppressed characteristics, and that these people themselves are going to have the special knowledge to imbue upon us. It really does, in my opinion, look less like a political conversation or a process through which we come to some kind of philosophical truth, and it looks much more like looking towards a medicine man, someone who is appointed with a specific pedigree or specific signs about them that should be able to give us some insight into the truth. And when you really think about things in this way, you're never going to come to any good conclusions, in my opinion. And I guess that's how I would close that out. So back to you, Brandon.
Okay, very good. So those were the articles for the day. We're going to end this episode with a bit of a fun rapid fire round between me and Verv. I will ask Verv a few questions, and he will also ask me a few questions. So Verv, first question.
Let's do it.
First question: what do you think of the criticism? I heard a criticism before about the Eastern Orthodox Church, or the Orthodox Church, and the criticism was that it's too reliant on what you guys call the early church fathers, and not reliant enough on just the Bible itself. What would you say about that criticism?
I would actually just say that the early church fathers, everything that they're doing is an interpretation of the message of the Bible. And when you read something like the Philokalia, you will see that so many of the passages are based on clarifying different parts of the Bible, and just expounding upon them and talking about, like, so when you do get to this heightened spiritual sense where you're no longer viewing others as your enemy, what are the signs of that, or what are some of the things you can do to achieve that? I think that it never goes beyond a point of view that is biblical, in the sense that there is nothing that is said by the early church fathers that goes too far beyond what Christ himself has ever said. It's really all just pointing back to the Bible itself. I hope that was fast enough to count as blitz.
Sure. Your turn.
So my question for you is, what's your favorite Native American tribe? North or South America, doesn't matter.
So it can be when we say tribe, it can be like a civilization size. So like, are we counting Aztecs, Mayans, Incas?
Yeah, we'll count them. We'll count them.
Yeah. I'll go with the Aztecs. Just because of the pure how fascinating the culture is. It is a terrible culture, and I actually was thinking about, and probably in the future going to release a video on our channel about the Aztecs and why the conquering of them by the Spanish was one of the greatest things that has happened for humanity. But with that being said, they were still a very fascinating culture, and specifically with like human sacrifice and the way that their religion was a part of their culture. It was very interesting. So there's a lot of information that interests me, although I think it was a terrible culture in the end.
Excellent.
Next question for you. Do aliens exist?
This is one of the hardest questions in the world to me. I used to firmly believe that they do. Now I lean towards the idea that they do not. I am not 100%, but I'm going towards the idea of no, I don't believe they're real.
So just to expand upon that, you would say no life of any sort exists, or no intelligent life?
I think it's possible that you would have something like maybe there are some vent germs or vent plants or something on a sea vent or a heat vent of some kind. But I think it would really be like, these are hardly distinguishable from vegetables or something. And, I'm not an expert on this, but I think that all of these other planets, they have such extreme environments it won't work. And so many of these planets that they say are in the Goldilocks zone are actually what they call tidally locked. So that means that half the planet's in pure darkness, half the planet is in pure sunlight, and it's too hot for anything to live. And they on these planets will just have one small part of them that is in this permanent sense of twilight that's theoretically habitable or something. There's very few planets in the Goldilocks zone that actually spin and have this constant exposure to both day and night. So I'm really skeptical of the idea that there's intelligent life anywhere in the universe. Yes.
Okay.
So that'll bring me to my question for you. Kind of in the same one, I have to admit I was inspired by your question. Do you believe ghosts exist?
I do not believe that they exist. I assume that you're talking about the stereotypical view of ghosts as in people who have died and their soul or some part of them is trapped in some sort of netherworld or some sort of place between heaven, hell, and earth or something. I would say that no, I don't believe that is possible. I do believe that, and we've talked about this before on the show, that things like demons do exist, and I do believe that they can perhaps take the form of maybe a ghost or something, but I don't believe that if I saw something that looked like the form of a ghost, I would not believe that was a former person who has lived on Earth and they are in some sort of in-between state. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, this is the last one for you. What are your thoughts on euthanasia?
That is another great question. Maybe we'll have to do an episode on it later. I think we're actually at a point where our medical technology has so advanced beyond usefulness in certain areas. I mean, obviously there's a use for a bunch of these drugs and these procedures, but I think we were into a real bad issue where people are prolonging suffering and suffering lives instead of actually, saving anybody. And if you're just going to keep people in a medically induced coma or in a state where they're just laying in a bed dependent on some kind of IV drip, it's really hard to think of that as some kind of life. But at the same point, I do believe in kind of the biblical principle of you shouldn't just lay down and die or anything. So I have this weird position where I don't support this kind of medical predicament where you now have to choose to live or die. I think there should just be at a point where there is a cutoff line established that by everyone really that like, okay, this actually isn't life. And at this point, we have to just pull the plug. I think it's a really complicated thing because you really should never kill yourself and you should always cling to life in a sense. So I guess if I'm really badly hurt and in a bad situation, I will never choose to kill myself. And so you have the responsibility of killing me for my own good. Thank you very much. And my last question for you is, the Korea thing did come up today. So kind of an interesting, but maybe a little bit controversial question. What thing about living in Korea is your pet peeve?
Well, I wouldn't call it, well, do you want to know pet peeve or just something I don't like in general?
Sure, let's say like something you don't like, but it really grinds your gears.
Well, I would say then it's the pollution. That's the one thing that has really, and by pollution I mean air pollution. That's the one thing that's really bothered me about living in Korea from the very beginning, especially what we call the yellow dust here, which happens around springtime. I just, I can't stand, having to wear a mask outside because of, pollution that is a result of, Chinese factories, or a combination of Chinese factories and, pollution caused by Korea and perhaps dust particles from the Gobi Desert. It's just really hard for me to deal with that for a few months. And then ever since I've had a child, it has annoyed me even more because, you not being able to take your child outside because of pollution levels being too high is just not something I would have ever even needed to think about living in America. And it just really annoys me that I have to, think about that sometimes in Korea. Although the pollution levels have been quite good for like the past 6 months, I would say.
Right. Very good answer. And on that note, we both should move to the countryside.
Yeah, but the thing is, even there, you can't really get away from it sometimes. Like, for example, you would think in Jeju, you'd think, it's an island, and they oftentimes have moderate to high levels of pollution, which it's just, it's really sad.
Absurd. So Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And Brandon, do you want to sign us off fully?
Sure thing. Hopefully you enjoyed this type of episode. It was a bit different for us. If you've made it this far, thank you. We also will probably be trying a bit of a different editing strategy with this video. We'll probably be releasing the video as a whole, but then also releasing short clips of the video, probably in the order of the articles that we ran down. So there'll probably be 4 separate clips as well. But yes, thank you again for listening, and we will hope to see you again next time on the Paleoconnection. Thank you.